Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Thanks so much for being here with us. Happy October. October is spooky season. It's sweater weather, but more importantly, it is Occupational Therapy Month and it is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. In honor of that, and to help Gowan Consulting celebrate our 25th anniversary in business, we have an exciting two-part series webinar featuring two of my esteemed colleagues, Kelly Stewart and Rebecca Gewirtz. Today is a webinar format, so we do ask that you mute your microphones to allow everyone to have the best experience. We're also asking that if you have any questions, please add those into the chat, and we are going to save time at the end to answer any of your questions. Just so you all know, this session will be recorded and is currently being recorded. So if you do not want to appear on video, please turn your camera off and ensure that your microphone is muted. Today, please let us know in the chat where you're joining from, what your role is, what organization you're with, and what you hope to get out of the session today. And while everyone is doing that, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we're joining on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we all currently call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral, the unceded, and the treaty territories of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people that call this land home. I am personally grateful to join from land that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Wendat, Nyanwensu, Haudenosaunee, Petun, and Mississauga territories. The land that is now called Barrie, Ontario, is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. I also acknowledge that this land is still home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I encourage everyone here today to carve out time to learn more about the Indigenous nations in your area, understand the meaning of our signed treaties, and take action towards truth and reconciliation. On Monday, we paused to reflect and learn about the history of residential schools and ongoing disparities for Indigenous peoples. As we acknowledge National Disability Employment Awareness Month, we must also be aware of the inequality that still exists today, with a 30% higher rate of disabilities within the Indigenous population in Canada. Many Indigenous communities continue to be affected by minimal economic and employment opportunities, as well as many other disparities in resources, which impact their ability to reach full social and economic inclusion. I hope that as we discuss the importance of recruiting and hiring and supporting employees with disabilities, you think about your programming on a larger scale that also offers economic opportunities to Indigenous people and communities. I hope that your reflecting, learning, and reconciliation efforts span far past our day of pause on National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I do see that we have some people answering in the chat. So thank you guys so much for sharing where you're from. It's great to see such a variety of rules and the areas represented. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Nicolette Gowan, and I am proudly a registered occupational therapist, and I am the owner of Gowan Consulting. This year, Gowan Consulting celebrates our 25th year in business, following on the passion of our founder, Nancy Gowan, for advancing disability management best practices and promoting the invaluable role of occupational therapy in the workplace. Today, we continue to focus on functional abilities and work all across Canada. We provide assessment and intervention for employees with disabilities, including accommodation assessments, ergonomics, mental health support, return to work services, training for leaders and organizations, and consultation services to assist you in implementing some of the best practices, including those that will be outlined today. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters and facilitators today. First, we have Kelly Stewart. Kelly is an occupational therapist and a training manager at Gowan Consulting, and she brings over 19 years of expertise in occupational therapy, specializing in work accommodations and return to work strategies for individuals facing mental health or cognitive challenges. Holding a master's degree in occupational therapy from University of Western Ontario, Kelly has demonstrated a profound commitment to advancing the field and advocating for the needs of both clients and practitioners alike. As the occupational therapist and training manager at Gowan Consulting, Kelly plays a pivotal role in fostering workplace inclusivity and productivity. And I'd like to introduce Rebecca Gewurz. She's an occupational therapist and associate professor in the School of Rehabilitation Science at McMaster University, and an adjunct scientist at the Institute for Work and Health. She is the director of the Inclusive Design for Employment Access, otherwise known as IDEA Initiative, and co-lead of Hub 2 Employment Support Systems. Rebecca's research focuses on work disability policy, income insecurity, and employment among persons living with disabilities, with a focus on mental illness and other episodic disabilities. She has been examining the experiences of various stakeholders, including people with disabilities, service providers, co-workers, and employers, as people with disabilities are hired and accommodated in diverse workplaces, as well as the impact and coordination of income security benefits. So thank you both for presenting to us today, and we are all very excited to learn from you. I will pass it over now to Kelly.
Just going to get started with a little bit of a video.
Disability inclusion creates safety, accessibility, belonging, impact, visibility, innovation, growth, community. Disability inclusion is essential, empowering, working barrier-free. Over 1 billion people have a disability, 1 billion reasons for change.
All right. So this year's theme for NDEAM is access to good jobs for all. And for this session and the series, so today and as well as on October 8th, we wanted to highlight attracting top talent, interviewing and hiring from a disability and inclusion lens. So we're going to be sharing with you our expertise today as occupational therapists, and as well from Rebecca from a researcher's perspective. So during this session, we're going to be reviewing the benefits of inclusive practices for all employees, attracting and hiring top talent, so finding the right people for the right fit for the job roles that you have, the benefits of hiring disabled workers, as well as consideration for workplace diversity and inclusion, and touching on best practices around hiring and interviewing for today's session. I'm going to pass it on to Rebecca.
Hi, it's lovely to be here, and thank you for including me on this webinar. So as already mentioned, one of the major things I'm involved in at the moment is IDEA, which is a social innovation lab, inclusive design for employment access. And this is a knowledge to practice initiative that's funded federally by a granting agency called the New Frontiers in Research. And we got a transformation fund, which basically means that we were charged about 2.5 years ago with making some significant change in this field. And our focus is on advancing the skills and capacities of workplace parties in the area of inclusive employment. And mostly we approach this by developing evidence-informed products that support inclusive workplaces. And we do have a website that you can visit. We are in the process of it's ongoing research, so the website isn't completely populated, but there's a lot there. And we're really interested in working with employers and service providers and people with disabilities across Canada and even beyond to better understand how we can make some real change in this area. So really great to be here and to see familiar faces as well as new faces on the call.
People with disabilities represent over 1.8 billion people globally. When combined with friends and family, the disability market touches 53% of consumers and controls over $13 trillion in annual disposable income. The size and scope of this market is large and unrealized. People with disabilities have functional demands that dovetail nicely with the needs of aging baby boomers and represent a viable talent source as labor markets tighten. The disability market is tipping. Are you ready? The return on disability model highlights specific actions each business can take to maximize value by delighting their customers, attracting great talent, and leveraging innovation from people with disabilities to making existing assets more productive. Companies that enhance their customer experience by utilizing insights from the disability market outperform their peers in revenue growth. Public and private organizations that hire individuals with disabilities with motivated intent benefit from employees who generate lower costs and higher productivity, resulting in higher returns. Leveraging insights from disability drives productivity. Complex and costly processes become simplified and more efficient overall when designed by and for people with disabilities. Top organizations understand this model and use it to their advantage. Disney incorporates park design features for the disability market, enhancing customer experience for all. It continuously incorporates the disability experience into its on-screen characters, bonding with its customers, and making Disney a leader in value creation. Google's disability-driven innovation leads to product design it then applies to its core customers. From the beta stage, disability market needs are the inspiration for Google's many now mainstream innovations. Google Glass, Google Voice, and Google Car find their roots in disability and drive Google to the top ranking in ROD research. TD Bank is a leader in value creation due to the inclusion of people with disabilities in their talent pipeline, as well as how the company talks about the disability market as a driver of their business. TD sets an excellent example for brands wishing to communicate the connection of disability to business results. Attract the disability market and improve customer experience. Grow your top line, find the right talent, and increase shareholder value for investors. Do disability right to delight customers and shareholders. Connect with us to get started today.
So thank you so much. As you've noticed, we wanted to share some videos that really summarize how important inclusivity in the workplace is. But we also thought it was important to start with, like, what is the problem here? If inclusivity and creating and building inclusive workplaces is the solution. And I think it's important that we focus on the fact that much effort, both from a policy and service provision perspective and employers, is invested on improving employment levels of persons with disabilities. But we also, even despite this effort, we know that engagement in the labor market remains substantially lower among people with disabilities than people without disabilities. So people with disabilities are often excluded from careers, jobs, and work. And from recent data, we know that the employment rate of people with disability is 57% compared to 75%. So a significant difference in a substantial difference in employment rates. And we also know that among those who are working, many are stuck in entry-level, low-paying, precarious employment. And so the average earnings, unfortunately, this data is from 2017, are lower, 34,000 a year compared to 40,000 a year among those without disabilities. And there's also underemployment in terms of hours, skill, and pay. And these are significant problems. These challenges are compounded by people who are also part of other marginalized groups, like in terms of gender identity, sexual orientation, racial identity, and indigeneity. We know that COVID-19 further magnified these disparities. And at the end of the day, this is a significant waste of human potential. So labor market exclusion leads to dependency on social transfer. It costs us money in terms of poverty and exacerbation of social challenges. And it impacts our GDP. So output and productivity losses can be at 3.2% of the GDP. And when you look in totality, the cost of exclusion across all areas has been estimated up to 17% of the GDP. So this isn't a small issue. This is a significant issue, and it's going to get worse as we know that there's predictions of projections of growing labor shortages. So we have to pay attention. Going to the next slide, we also know that there's benefits to business for having diverse teams. And so a significant proportion of the Canadian working age Canadians have disabilities. So 1 in 5 working age Canadians in the labor force experience some form of disability, and that is over 20% of the workforce, or 3.2 million workers, and that's StatsCan data. We also know that there's actual benefits to employers, to work teams, of having diverse and neurodiverse teams. One benefit is that it can fill current talent gaps, while also reducing reliance and spending on social assistance. So this is from a policy perspective, a win-win. But also, employers who have embraced neurodiversity report few challenges and many benefits for their entire team, including improved communication, innovation, and company morale. And then drawing on some data from Accenture in 2018, firms in the top 20% of workplace disability inclusion earned 28% more revenue and 30% higher profits than competitors. So the more diverse the leadership is, the greater the chance that the company will outperform its less diverse competitors. So all of this really suggests that having diverse, and in particular neurodiverse teams, can have important benefits to employers. And it can enhance innovation, as well as outputs and productivity.
Mhm. And so for this presentation, we wanted to just highlight that it's important to consider inclusivity and accessibility throughout the full employee journey. So for fostering inclusion at every stage of the employee within the organization. So talking from attracting the right candidates, and being able to reach those more diverse audiences, reaching employees with disabilities, all the way up to their progression within the organization itself. So thinking about those policies and procedures throughout that whole process for the employee. So for this session today, we're going to be focusing a little bit more at the beginning of the journey, but we wanted to highlight that it's important to take those factors into consideration all throughout the organization and all along the employee's journey in the organization. So we're going to move on to touching on some of those best practices around inclusive recruitment. So this is an important element of the organization's diversity and inclusion strategy. So this helps to open things up to a larger pool of potential candidates, to reaching those people who really do have some great skills to meet the demands of the job roles that you are offering or looking to fill. We see that really only 4% of companies include hiring these people with disabilities as part of their diversity initiatives. So it's not really being taken into consideration or being part of an active approach within the organization's diversity practices to really be able to reach out to and attract those employees. We see that organizations that do include an active effort around inclusive recruitment, we see some increased innovation within the organization. And increased ability to attract new customers. So employees with disabilities come with their own perspectives and experiences, and they're better able to highlight those for the customers that you serve who may also have some of those experiences, and through their lived experience be able to bring that different perspective to be able to better meet the needs of your customers or potential customers. As well, for employees who are seeking employers with a diverse workforce. So we see employees with disabilities as well as other employees or non-disabled employees who are more conscious now about the types of organizations that they want to interact with as customers, as well as to apply to as workers. And so they're looking for more organizations who are actively and demonstrate their participation in increasing inclusion within their organization and improving accessibility for all. I'll pass it over to Rebecca.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So focusing on how to do inclusive recruitment, one of the important pieces is how do we proactively connect with candidates with disabilities? And one of the important things to mention here is often employers don't realize that they are already connecting with candidates with disabilities, that many disabilities or many people with disabilities, many disabilities are invisible. And I would say that that's why why it's so important to create inclusive workplaces, regardless, because it benefits everyone, and that many people with disabilities don't actually identify themselves as living with a disability. But for an organization that wants to um, tap into as diverse candidate pool as possible. What is typically recommended, what we recommend is to engage with various disability employment services in their communities. And one of our videos came from Odin, the Ontario Disability Employment Network, and they're a good organization across Ontario that can help you connect with an appropriate disability organization or service. Um, the the other thing to think about is where to advertise and to make sure you diversify where you place your advertisement in various job search sites dedicated to people with disabilities or other barriers to employment. So that's another important tip. And then it's also important to think about how to diversify the submission process and to ensure that you're not inadvertently excluding people. And then to also have to think about how to create flexibility within the job posting itself, both in terms of the wording, in terms of invitation to request accommodations in the interview process. And then also in terms of looking at the actual job requirements, making sure they're as open and as flexible as they can be. At times you need certain certifications, but to make them as open as possible for that particular role. And some of this flexibility and the wording of the actual advertisement can be actually done in collaboration with some of these employment services. Um, okay, and then demonstrating a commitment to accessibility and inclusion. This is really important because when people are considering applying to various organizations, this generation, we're going to do our research. And so it's really important to think about your organization's website, publication, and social media to ensure that it's inclusive and uses respectful language, that the website and the posts represent diversity, including people with disability. So in the images that are included on the website or on the job posting itself. that you include reference to attracting people with disabilities and other diversities in the organization statements, in the diversity statement that might be included on the job posting. That senior leaders within the organization act as disability champions to publicly promote the benefits of hiring diverse applicants, including people with disabilities, and to also feature stories of existing employees who may have disabilities as well. So those are really important steps to take. And then I've already mentioned that the application requirements should be as flexible and as broad as possible in order to attract the most diverse candidates, and really making sure that the minimum qualification standards truly represent the job that's being posted. And again, to encourage applicants to request accommodations if required for the interview itself, and to be flexible in that process, and to note in the job posting areas of flexibility within the organization, including flexible work hours, remote or hybrid work arrangements, and so forth. And then the last recommendation would be to include a contact person if people have questions.
Great. So to go along with what Rebecca was mentioning around those minimum qualification standards, so thinking about what are the skills that are required for that employability versus, what is maybe some minimal experience requirements. So I just wanted to share an example that we found from an employer posting that included some of that language. So just to give you a starting example, so this position is currently eligible for an education equivalency. So this job role, they included a description of if the job role was listed for X number of years of education requirement, what would be their equivalency in terms of experience, and that individuals who had that level of experience would also be considered. So this way it signals to people that they are welcome to apply if they feel that they have the skills and experience, and not just leaving it to that education equivalency or education level. As Rebecca noted earlier, there may be some types of job roles where a specific education or certification is required. And so that's not to say to override that. So for example, some healthcare workers, you would have to have the professional degree that would allow you to practice that healthcare profession. And for some other job roles, specific certifications, but where it's a different part of the qualifications, to really think about that and how you can capture the most people that may have the skills necessary to do the job. So we're going to talk a little bit now about that hiring piece. So not just that attracting potential candidates, but going on to the hiring process and interviewing. But I wanted to start out first with a little bit to touch on unconscious bias.
Most people you work with probably don't seem like they're sexist, racist, or prejudiced against people with disabilities, right? And yet, women, people of colour, and people with disabilities find it harder to get work, experience lower pay, and are more likely to have their abilities questioned by their colleagues. There are lots of reasons for this, but one is unconscious bias. Our brains are evolved to help us survive. That means they take lots of shortcuts to help us get through the day. These shortcuts, or heuristics, are vital, but they come at a cost. A heuristic that evolved to help us find a mate, like the halo effect, which assumes people who look healthy or attractive are also competent and good, isn't necessarily what we should be relying on when we're deciding who to promote in a business setting. Our world is much more complicated than our brains have evolved to deal with. And that's why our unconscious brains can be unreliable. Sometimes they make us play favourites. We give people unfair advantages or apportion unfair blame. We're most likely to tend towards biases when we're rushed or stressed. But this is also when the stakes are highest. In high-pressure situations, there are a few tools that can help. First, own your biases. Admit that you have them and try to notice them in your thinking. Second, think ahead. Anticipate some of the big decisions you might face and develop fair, impartial criteria you can use. Question yourself. Test your gut reactions. Make sure your decisions are based on the best reasons, not your instincts. Our unconscious is here to help us, but it's not always the right tool for the job. With a bit of work, we can make sure it doesn't hurt others and make sure we're making tough decisions with our conscious minds, where ethical decision making happens.
So they touched on thinking about the way that we're interacting and making choices, how typically those choices that can be unconsciously rooted in bias can be detrimental to individuals and essentially the organization as a whole, because it creates that workplace that's lacking in diversity. So thinking about how unconscious and affinity bias might manifest in that recruitment and hiring process. So some examples include a preference for one candidate because of that culture fit versus really looking at the skills and the abilities needed to fill that job role. A person that may have a shared alma mater, or perhaps there's some unconscious bias towards specific names or specific groups. An example of a thought or statement that someone might share is, I could see myself hanging out with them after work. So is that really the best perspective to have on this person being the best fit, the best skill for this job role? Or another example might be, this kind of person who has always filled this position. So really kind of limiting to the same type of person filling this role. So when we're talking about interviews, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, including something in the job posting about asking about accommodations if people need that, letting them know the process. And you could also ask about that within the interview process. So as the person's arriving, are there any accommodations they need? However, just keeping in mind that sometimes candidates, especially those individuals who may have what we call a non-apparent or invisible disability, may not be comfortable sharing that in that moment for fear of the impact of disclosing a disability. But there may be some accommodations that you upfront just offer to every candidate. So you can say, if you need XYZ, we have that available to you. Just let us know. Or, hey, we're offering these things from the start. Other ideas are to think about really just offering those things right up front to everyone. So including the names of all interview participants who will be attending, including that estimate of duration, and allowing adequate time for people to be able to answer all the questions. So if you are asking standardized interview questions, that you make sure that you allot enough time for all candidates to be able to answer all of the questions. If one candidate doesn't have enough time and they're missing one question, does that negatively impact how you're scoring them? So you want to think about allowing time for people to process the information during the interview, process the question, and have time to respond. So perhaps considering that, and if you're often rushed through that standardized questioning, it may need to be revised and shortened a little bit. Sending out the interview itinerary, so what to expect, the timing, when, where to meet, but as well as sending the questions out ahead of time. A lot of times, there's some typical types of questions that may be asked in interviews, and people can look those up online. So why not offer the opportunity for people to come with their best answers and descriptions of their skills, to really be able to share and highlight with you what their skills are to meet the job needs. Especially if not one of the key skills is not thinking on your feet. If there are some different skills required to fill the job role, then there really isn't any reason that they providing those questions in advance would cause any difficulty or any issues with that. Thinking about the accessibility of the physical location. So is it easy for people to access? If someone has a mobility issue, is it there any sensory challenges in terms of it's a really bright light or a lot of noise, those types of things. So just thinking about the overall accessibility. And then speaking directly to the interviewee. So some interviewees may bring a companion or an interpreter with them to the interview as part of an accommodation. And so if that is the case, if they have had that request for that accommodation and it's been approved and they have another person with them who attends the interview, then it's important that you speak directly to the person and not speaking to their interpreter. Also, you want to think about some considerations if you're offering virtual interviews. This has become a little bit more commonplace over the last while. So making sure that all candidates can access the interview. So using platforms that are easily accessible or frequently used, that doesn't require any type of special login or downloading of things, because you may have a candidate who has some limited access to the digital technology that they're able to use. So are there, say, someone that has to, they don't have a computer and they may have to go to a library to have their interview. They may have to do it off of their phone. So are the formats that you're using accessible and easy for people? You may want to provide some information around video interview best practices in advance. So if there are some expectations that you have for the candidate, letting them know those up front so that they can arrive prepared. And then checking your bias. So being aware of how things like perhaps background noise or visuals might impact your perspective in how you're evaluating that person. Like I said, they may have some limitations in terms of joining that virtual interview, what kind of background they may have, what there may be some interruptions in their environment that they have no control over. So taking those out of your consideration and when you're thinking about them as being the best candidate, not letting those biases influence. I'm going to pass that off to Rebecca.
Yeah, so whenever in all of our research, I would say flexibility is often highlighted as the most common way to be inclusive. Um, and flexibility is often thought of about in terms of when, where, and how a job is done. So you can't always be flexible across all three of these areas, but you can often be flexible in some way. And it is context specific. It does require creativity and a really good understanding of the workplace requirements as well as the culture of the organization. And I'll just really briefly give you an example. Would be any kind of educator or teacher. They need to be at the school or the site of learning during the hours that the course is offered. So a school teacher needs to be at the school during the hours, during the school hours. But there may be some flexibility in terms of where in the school they're teaching, the classroom. Maybe they need to move around less and have a single classroom that they can set up in a way that meets their needs. Maybe not be in a busy part of the school where there's lots of noise, or outside classroom noise and so forth. And sometimes there might be flexibility in terms of their break time. So there's ways to build in flexibility, even if there's rigidity or requirements that can't be changed. And so going on to the next slide, we want to introduce you to Sarah, who is neurodiverse. And she's going to talk a little bit about what that means in the context of her life. And we want you to think about how you might interview or how it might work to interview a candidate like Sarah.
I took two things that I love, dancing and dogs, and I made them into a successful business.
Yes. All right. Can you explain for people who may not know what life is like, what day-to-day life is like for you?
I don't know what day-to-day life is like for a non-autistic person because
Sure.
this is all I know. But I will get up in the morning, usually tired because sleep is a huge issue for people with autism or autistic people. You see, even I get tripped up on it.
Is it lack of sleep? Why is it hard to sleep?
It's just disordered sleep. I didn't sleep through the night for the first 3.5 years of my life, and I'm still working on getting that up into double digits now. And then from then on, it's managing sensory issues, dealing with executive function disorder because I can't necessarily manage my day the way a neurotypical or non-autistic person would. And then trying to navigate social issues. I have a great network of family and friends. I love them dearly. I don't necessarily always have the energy to keep up my end of the deal as much as I'd like to.
What would your end of the deal be?
Just in terms of something as simple as knowing how to hold up a reciprocal conversation, to being able to be in a group in public and keep up the energy the whole time, even though I love and care people and I like hanging out with people, it just tends to take a lot out of me and drains a lot of energy.
And are you always aware of perhaps how other people might be viewing you? That double track is going.
Yes, it's like a constant awareness, and I'd like to think that over 36 years of studying it, I have sort of a good idea of what people's responses are, but I also have years of bullying, years of being told that I'm not normal or not likable. So there's also a constant panic of, is the feedback I'm getting actually real? Am I too much for someone? Am I being weird for someone? Am I doing something unacceptable that I don't even understand?
And do you rely then on other people to give you that feedback?
Yes, and of course in our society it's just way too polite, so they want to give you sort of subtle feedback, which is not necessarily a way my neurology responds to. I would need more than a hint.
A direct response?
Yes.
A direct and frank
Yes.
answer.
And then
Okay.
when we give that back in return, we're, being cold or
Okay.
callous.
It must be very tricky.
Sorry, we wanted to pause it now. I think we gave you a little taste of Sarah, and we just had some questions for you to consider. If Sarah were applying to be a member of your team or within your organization, and the first question, we're asking you to go onto Slido, I believe, where you can just scan and join us there. And Kelly has put it in the chat as well. So how might your interview and onboarding process create unnecessary barriers?
Yeah, so if you have a smartphone, you could just scan the QR code and that will bring you to the Slido. You can answer it that way. You can go to slido.com and enter the code that I've included in the chat. Or if you're having some issues, just go ahead and you can put your answer in the chat as well.
Please do whatever's fastest. We want to
There you
get
go.
some answers. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I also wondered about maybe having like sometimes we do panel interviews, how that might be hard to have lots of people. Um, where she's having to like interpret too much social information.
Great. So we have some good examples there.
Yeah. Yeah. So and often these are things that you can adjust in your hiring process or interviewing process by giving people some choice.
And we'll go to the next one.
Yeah. So this is really how might you adjust your approach?
Great. Thank you for including your answers, everyone. Yeah, also I'll let you if you had something else that you wanted to add, Rebecca, before we go on to the next slide.
No, these are questions that we recommend you think if you are hoping to recruit diverse candidates to really think through how to make this process as inclusive and inclusive to diverse job candidates, and how to anticipate some of the barriers that different people might encounter, that aren't about the requirements of the position.
So we just wanted to include some resources for you. So if you look at your slide handouts that were sent out, you can take a look at some of these resources that are available online. We're going to move on to taking some questions. And I do have some questions that people had sent in advance when they were registering. As well, you'll see here on your screen, there's a QR code. If you have a smartphone and you'd be willing to, that is just a little feedback survey. So you can always click on there and give us a little bit of feedback about today's session. And keep in mind that we will be having another session next week that you can join us for. So the questions that I had provided in advance from registrants, there was one that was asking about if there would be any cost for disabled workers joining future events with Gowan. So thank you for that question that someone sent in. And no, so we do host free events from time to time, typically about 4 to 5 webinars per year. And anyone is welcome to join. So we try to advertise those on our social media and our website so that people can just register and join us for free for those specific webinars. So keep an eye out. Typically, our next one will be coming up sometime in January. We had a question about how to support a worker with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I wanted to highlight that we cover supporting employees that experience mental health challenges in our managing mental health training that we often do run for leaders or managers. So that is a specific training that we either offer for organizations or we do offer it for individuals to register from time to time. Typically, we will run that once a year virtual course. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can always reach out to us. You can go to our website and there's some information about the trainings that we offer either online or that you can request some information about that. And if this is a question, I'm not sure, that was sent in about a specific person or a specific case, if it's a challenging situation that you're dealing with and there are some specific needs, then you might want to reach out to us either via email, or you can also make a referral through our website on our referral line. So I'll just include that in the chat here as well. Oh, you're asking about sharing the link to the interview the interview video? Yeah, I can add that again at the end. And then we had another question that had come in. Someone was asking about getting around the requirements for the Ontario secondary diploma. So if an individual completed high school in the developmental education stream, but they don't have the OSSD. So as we sort of touched on earlier, it may be difficult from an individual's perspective, but you can always try to apply to roles where you feel that your experience may meet the skills for that job role, even if you don't have the education requirement. And then on the flip side, like we talked about, for organizations to take that into consideration in terms of their job posting and recruitment, letting people know that they do provide some type of equivalency, or they will accept applications from individuals who don't have that education requirement, but may have the skills through other avenues that are highlighted in the list of job skills. And then I'm just going to take a quick look to see if we have any other questions in the chat. I don't see any other questions coming in, but if you have any other questions, feel free to add those or to message us at a later time. We can always reach out to you to try to respond to that. I wanted to highlight as well that if you are interested in more information like we presented today or similar workplace health topics, you can always join our newsletter and blog at gowanhealth.com or reach out to us and interact with us on social media. We do post quite frequently on social media, some tips and tricks and links to resources, things like that. So that's a great way to keep yourself up to date on that type of information. We did touch a little bit throughout our presentation today around supporting individuals with non-apparent disabilities and neurodiversity. So if that was a specific topic that you were interested in and you want to learn more about neurodiversity training for yourself or your organization, that is another training that we do offer through Gowan, and we will be presenting on that at the Schedule 2 Employers Conference next week.
Yeah, and similarly, if you're interested over the next few years, please do connect with us through IDEA. We hope to have lots of tools and resources that will be useful to different people in the sector. We already have some stuff up there. It's going to be constantly evolving over time. So please check back regularly and please consider joining our newsletter so that you'll be updated. We do also offer a monthly webinar series of really interesting and related topics. And yeah, so I encourage you to connect with us, reach out. You can also email me directly. I'm pretty easy to locate my email address, but it's just my last name at mcmaster.ca.
Great. So we just want to thank you for joining us for today. We do still have a little bit of time, so if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or